In 2026, the Australian government will introduce tax cuts for Australian taxpayers. What are the effects of these tax cuts on the Australian economy? Well, when the Australian government introduces tax cuts for households, their disposable income rises, giving consumers more money to spend on goods and services. Using the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model, these tax cuts are likely to have significant effects on the Australian economy in both the short run and long run. In the short run, there will be a direct increase to aggregate demand. The aggregate demand curve will shift rightward from AD1 to AD2, or the blue lines, pushing the price level up from P1 to P2 and real GDP higher from Y asterisk to Y1. Employment will also increase as firms such as St. Ali will have to hire more workers to meet higher demand. This moves the economy above its long-run equilibrium, creating an inflationary expansion. Because output at Y1 exceeds the economy's full employment level at Y asterisk, labour shortages and higher demand for resources push up wages and production costs. As costs rise, firms reduce supply, causing the short-run aggregate supply curve to shift left from SRAS1 to SRAS2, or the red lines. This means that equilibrium moves from point B back to point C, in which real GDP falls back to Y asterisk. However, the price level rises further from P2 to P3, resulting in inflation. Furthermore, employment moves back to its natural level. These changes demonstrate the long-run effect that the tax cuts will create. In relation to St. Ali, the movement from point A to point B would likely increase sales in the short run as customers have more disposable income and spend more on discretionary purchases such as specialty coffee. However, as the economy adjusts from point B to point C, St. Ali may face higher wage costs, increased rent, and more expensive ingredients in the long run due to inflation. While demand for its products may remain strong, rising operating costs could reduce profit margins unless prices are increased. The cause of inflation since COVID-19 is a combination of both demand and supply. One key factor resulting in this inflation is an increase in consumer demand following lockdowns. During the pandemic, households accumulated savings due to government stimulus payments, wage subsidies, and reduced spending opportunities as everyone was required to stay inside. Once these restrictions eased, consumers would have rapidly increased spending on goods and services such as hospitality and travel. This surge in aggregate demand placed upward pressure on prices, also known as demand pull inflation. At the same time, global supply chain disruptions reduced the supply of many goods. Issues such as factory shutdowns, shipping delays, and labour shortages increased production and transport costs worldwide. Businesses pass these higher costs onto consumers, creating cost push inflation. Furthermore, Australia experienced labour shortages after the pandemic due to border closures and skill shortages. As businesses competed for workers, wages would have increased in some industries. Higher labour costs can contribute to inflation when firms raise prices to maintain profitability. In response to this inflation, the Reserve Bank of Australia implemented contractionary monetary policy by raising interest rates. So, what were the effects on the price level, real GDP, and employment? Higher interest rates increase the cost of borrowing for households and businesses. Mortgage repayments rise, leaving consumers less disposable income to spend. Businesses are also less likely to borrow money for investment and expansion. As spending and investment decline, aggregate demand in the economy falls. This reduces upward pressures on prices, helping lower the inflation rate and stabilise the price level over time. Raising interest rates also affect real GDP and employment. Because consumer spending and business investments decrease, economic growth slows and real GDP is likely to fall or grow at a slower pace. Businesses may experience lower sales and profits, causing them to reduce production or delay expansion. As economic activity slows, unemployment may rise because firms hire fewer workers or reduce staff numbers. In relation to St. Ali, higher interest rates may cause consumers to reduce spending on what they consider a non-necessity, such as premium cafe experiences, specialty coffee, and dining out. This would lower customer demand, which may lead to reduced revenue. St. Ali may also face increased operations costs from inflation, including higher wages, rent, electricity, and imported coffee bean prices. If the business raises prices to cover these costs, some customers may purchase less frequently. Additionally, higher interest rates make borrowing more expensive, which could limit St. Ali's ability to invest in new stores, equipment, or expansion opportunities. I will now be discussing tariffs and what their effects would be on the US market for coffee beans. Using a demand and supply model, we can see that without a tariff on coffee beans, the US price will be equal to the world price of $1.20 per kilogram. At $1.20 per kilogram, American coffee bean producers will sell 400,000 kilograms of coffee beans. US consumers will purchase 1.1 million kilograms, and imports will be 700,000 kilograms. Implementing a 40-cent per kilogram of coffee beans tariff raises the price of coffee beans in the US to $1.60 per kilogram. At this higher price, US coffee bean producers increase the quantity they supply to 600,000 kilograms of coffee beans. However, US consumers reduce their purchases to 900,000 kilograms of coffee beans. Equilibrium moves from point E to point F, and the coffee bean tariff causes a loss of consumer surplus equal to areas A, B, C, and D. Area A shows the increase in producer surplus due to the higher price, while Area C is the revenue the government will receive due to the tariff. Areas B and D represent dead weight loss. So, who wins and loses in this situation? Firstly, we'll look at the winners. Domestic coffee bean producers benefit as they gain their surplus in Area A. The higher price means they earn more revenue on every kilogram they were already selling. The US government also benefits as they collect Area C as tariff revenue. This will be used to fund public spending. In comparison, US consumers are negatively impacted as the price of coffee beans increases and they end up paying more per kilogram. Finally, foreign coffee exporters such as St. Ali suffer as their products become more expensive and less competitive in the US market. A US tariff on imported coffee would likely have several negative effects on St. Ali's operations and profitability. Because the tariff increases the price of imported coffee in the United States, St. Ali's products would become more expensive for American consumers and businesses. As a result, demand for St. Ali's coffee is likely to decrease as consumers switch to cheaper domestic alternatives or substitute products. This reduction in demand would lead to lower export sales and revenue for St. Ali. Since they position themselves as a premium coffee brand, some loyal customers may continue purchasing its products despite higher prices. However, many consumers are price sensitive and may reduce their purchases when prices rise. This would make it more difficult for St. Ali to expand its presence into the US market. The tariff could also reduce St. Ali's competitiveness relative to American coffee producers. Domestic firms would not be subject to the tariff and could therefore offer similar products at lower prices. This may result in St. Ali losing market share to local competitors. In the long run, St. Ali may need to adjust its business strategy. The company could seek alternative export markets, increase marketing efforts to emphasize its premium quality and unique brand image, or absorb part of the tariff costs to keep prices competitive. However, absorbing the tariff would reduce profit margins. If the US market is strategically important, St. Ali should consider establishing roasting, packaging, or distribution operations within the United States to avoid tariff costs altogether. An understanding of behavioral economics can help St. Ali make better business decisions by recognizing that customers do not always make perfectly rational choices. Traditional economics assumes consumers carefully weigh all costs and benefits before making decisions, whereas behavioral economics, as discussed by Richard H. Thaler, suggests that consumers' decisions are often influenced by psychological biases, habits, and the way choices are presented. By understanding these behaviors, St. Ali can design strategies that encourage desired customer actions and improve business performance. Behavioral economics has direct practical implications for how the business designs its customer experience, prices its products, builds loyalty, and manages wholesale relationships. Two concepts, framing and loss aversion, can help St. Ali make meaningfully better business decisions across its cafe. Framing, which Thaler discusses through research by Kahneman and Tversky, suggests that decisions can change depending on how information is presented, even when the underlying choices are identical. St. Ali can use this insight when designing menus or promotion. For example, their shopfronts should place high-priced specialty coffee at the top of the menu. The $7 option appears more reasonable when compared with the $12 option. This is known as anchoring, where the first price consumers see influences their perception of value. By carefully framing products, St. Ali can influence customer perceptions and purchasing decisions. Loss aversion is the concept that people tend to feel the pain of losses more strongly than the satisfaction of equivalent gains. St. Ali can apply this principle through its loyalty program. One strategy could be offering customers points that expire after a certain period. Rather than focusing on what customers can gain, marketing messages could emphasize what they stand to lose. This is because customers are often more motivated to avoid losing existing rewards than to earn new ones. Overall, Thaler's behavioral economics demonstrates that understanding human psychology can provide businesses with a competitive advantage. By applying concepts such as framing and loss aversion, St. Ailey can better influence consumer behavior, increase customer loyalty, and make more effective business decisions.